Today's video is brought to you by AG1. It's good practice once in a while to test your opinions versus people who hold opinions wildly different from your own. So let's try this with Tesla, which is a company that I'm very impressed with. How does Tesla stack up against the arguments against it? I'm going to examine the flip side of the Tesla coin and see if the stock TSLA is overvalued or not. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. For those who regularly watch me, you know that I'm a pretty big Tesla bull, and I'm very impressed with Tesla as a company. But today I really do want to look at the flip side of the coin and look at the arguments against Tesla. And of course, I'll do my best to represent these arguments as well as I can. Yes, some of the arguments are a tad ridiculous, so it's a little hard to take them seriously, but some of them actually have a grain or more of truth to them, so it is worth considering. I sent out a request asking for arguments against Tesla, and you guys fulfilled that in spades. I'm going to do this in no particular order, but I'm going to start with a very, very popular one, which is that production numbers keep outpacing sales numbers the last several quarters, which indicates that there's no interest in Tesla vehicles, and therefore Tesla is overvalued as a stock. Before I get into this, a really big shout out to Zach Kirkhorn, Master of Coin or former Master of Coin at Tesla. You did an amazing job with finances at Tesla over the last 4 years plus. I know you were just CFO for 4 years, but you were there for 13 years. You did an amazing job, and you're going to have really big shoes to fill. Good luck on the next stage of your life. I'm going to do this in no particular order, but I'm going to start with a very, very popular one, which is that production numbers keep outpacing sales numbers the last several quarters, which indicates that there's no interest in Tesla vehicles, and therefore Tesla is overvalued as a stock. So to look at the facts of this, I'm going to refer to an Inside EVs article. And by the way, I would leave links to all of this stuff in the description so you can check it out on your own time if you're interested. So in this first figure, which goes up to the end of 2022, you can see that delivery numbers, they are falling behind production numbers, but the numbers for everything are going up very, very significantly. But in terms of really looking at this, I think it's important to take a look at the second figure right here. This one shows days of supply starting in 2019 Q2 all the way up to Q4 of 2022. And you can see the days of supply range anywhere from like 3 days in Q1 of 2022 to about 25 days in Q1 of 2020. But generally speaking, they're hanging out in around the teens. Now, there are real outliers here. I mean, basically Q1 of 2020 all the way through about Q3 of 2022 is really an outlier. We started with the pandemic, and so in Q1 of 2020, nobody wanted to buy anything because they were all freaking out because of the COVID pandemic. Then we had people sitting at home and wanting to use their money because they couldn't travel and stuff. Then we had a chip shortage. We had lots and lots of restraints on the supply chain. And so you see the days of inventory dwindle all the way down to 3, which was nothing. I mean, it was like 6 months to order a vehicle. And of course, Tesla raised prices like crazy at that point. But then it sort of stabilized back up by Q4 of 2022. And the current value is around 15 or 16 days of inventory. And if you look all the way back to 2019, pre-pandemic, that is a pretty reasonable number. Around the mid-teens, it seems like a reasonable number of days of inventory. And that's very impressive considering how many more vehicles Tesla sold in 2022 and currently than they did in 2019. And of course, for perspective, the automotive industry as a whole has inventory of around 52 or 54 days, and EVs is even higher than that. It's in the 90s at this point. So the fact that Tesla is around 16 days of inventory, and remember that they have to transport these things. So a lot of the inventory is literally cars on trains and boats and trucks and things being delivered to people because they don't get to count those as sold as soon as they go to a dealership. They have to wait until a person buys it. And so there's a lot of transport involved. But anyway, the fact that Tesla is able to maintain inventory levels where it's only a couple of weeks at this point with the number that they are selling is pretty remarkable, honestly. More on that in a minute, but first, almost exactly a year ago, I was feeling really bad. I was feeling old, low energy, and honestly, it was very depressing. I figured I was probably getting old and there was nothing I could do about it. But then I discovered eating better and adding AG1 to my daily regimen made a huge difference. 1 year later, and I feel years younger. I have more energy. I can get more done. I don't have to sleep as much. It's really amazing. And AG1 has been a big part of that journey. And hey, guess what? It tastes delicious too. AG1 is packed with 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, prebiotics, probiotics, adaptogens. It's an amazing blend of things to make your body happy, support your gut health, and give you more energy. And honestly, this has been a big part of what has allowed me to get through a very, very difficult summer with health problems, travel, both professionally and personally, and flooding, which has put me in this office instead of my normal one. So my suggestion is you give it a try too and see if it helps you out. If you order through my link in the description, you get 5 free travel packs and a year's supply of vitamin D3 and K2 as well. So if you're not feeling your best and you want to feel better, do what I did and give AG1 a try. Just click the link in the description and get started today. And now let's get back to it. Next up, we have the argument that Tesla needs more models. They only have 4 currently, and only 2 are really big sellers. And the conventional wisdom is that you need many more models than this in order to drive demand for all of the market segments that you're going into. So again, there is some logic to this, but the counter argument is that the Model Y is currently the most popular car in the world. It is selling more than any other vehicle in the world. So that's a pretty good counter argument against needing more models in order to dominate an industry. In addition, of course, the Cybertruck is coming out possibly within weeks, certainly by the 4th quarter of this year. And of course, the next gen vehicle, the Model 2, should be coming out in 2025. And once that's ramped, that should make Model Y sales figures seem kind of ridiculously small. And then of course, we've got refreshes to the Model 3 and Model Y coming out very soon in the Highland and Juniper updates to the vehicles. Those are supposed to be pretty darn big upgrades to these vehicles, so that almost counts as a full refresh for these. So number 1, Tesla does not seem to be hurting currently with only having 4 models for sale, but number 2, they're going to have 2 more models relatively soon. Looks like a van is going to come out at some point, and their 2 biggest selling models, the Model 3 and Model Y, are due for very big refreshes very soon. Next up, we have a quote from Fact Chaser from August 5th of this year. In Norway, in July 2023, VW BEV brands Audi, Skoda, VW again outsold Tesla, which used to dominate Norway. So number 1, local vehicle sales are lumpy, and cherry picking any particular locale can make it look good or bad depending on which quarter it is, which month it is, things like that. Remember that you're either getting these cars shipped from Berlin or more likely from Shanghai at this point, and the vehicles are having to go around the world, and so they tend to put them on large shipments and ship them, and so you all of a sudden get a whole bunch of these vehicles into port and sell a bunch, and then you don't have one for a while, and obviously you can't sell those vehicles. So the vehicle sales are very, very lumpy. And in particular, in a country like Norway, which has relatively few car sales to begin with, that lumpiness can be pretty extreme. So what you need to look at instead is global sales, not local sales. You have to see, is Tesla selling more vehicles this quarter, producing and selling more vehicles this quarter than they did last quarter? Are they doing that the next quarter? Are they doing that the next quarter? That's the thing to look at, not any individual countries, and especially not any individual countries just in a single month. This one used to be much more popular than it is today, but that is the competition is coming and is going to kill Tesla. That was something that I heard from at least the 2015s when people started taking Tesla more seriously, that the competition was coming, it was going to destroy Tesla, and on and on and on. That seems to be dying on the vine of its own accord, so I'm not sure that I really need to argue against it. But outside of China and BYD in particular developing their EVs, there really isn't anybody who is selling the kind of numbers that Tesla is for pure battery electric vehicles. Next up is that Tesla is going to stall out without a dealership network. If you don't know, Tesla sells their vehicles direct to consumers. You can actually take your phone and in about 5 minutes order a vehicle. The price is standardized. You don't have to negotiate with anything. You go to Tesla, you pay for the vehicle, or you get the loan or whatever it is, and you walk out with a car. So there's none of the dealership sort of stuff. The argument is that you need dealerships in order to sell lots and lots of vehicles. I don't have a scientific study of this, but I have never talked to a single person, and I've talked to a lot of Tesla owners that have ever said, boy, I really wish that I'd gone through a dealership to get this vehicle. Not very many people enjoy going to an auto dealership, I guess, unless you happen to own one. So yes, there may be somebody out there that loves going to auto dealerships and negotiating and all of that kind of stuff, but for the vast majority of us, just being able to go on your phone and order it just like you would order something on Amazon or something and just receive it is much more enjoyable and pleasant than going to a dealership, which feels an awful lot like having your teeth pulled. Next up is EPA range versus actual range for Teslas. This is a place where I have to give some credence to the arguments against Tesla. If you look at this graph from Car and Driver, where they basically filled up the vehicles and drove them until they were empty, you can see that Tesla in general, down at the bottom left here, is in the 20% to 30+% less than their stated range. And that comes down to the way, it's an EPA stated range, but it comes down to the way that you sort of do it. There's different ways of testing your vehicle out to state the range. And you can see that in the top right, for example, the Mercedes-Benz and Porsche actually do very, very well and actually understate their range, which is a pleasant surprise. So this is a place where Tesla could definitely do better. If they say that you're going to get 325 miles of range or something, you shouldn't get something like 275 miles of range, which is more about what I actually get in the real world when I'm driving a Tesla rather than the stated range. So again, it's EPA range. It's never going to be perfect, but I think number one, the EPA could do a better job with EV range estimates. And number two, Tesla should probably try to get closer to real world range when they're actually stating these ranges so that their consumers are pleased with the vehicles when they get them. While we're on the subject of range and charging, there are many arguments against Tesla in this area. First of all, we have charging takes forever. And yes, if you plug the vehicle into a standard wall outlet, like something on the wall behind me, a 120 volt, 10 amp wall outlet, it will take a really, really long time to charge. But these vehicles can charge up very, very rapidly at DC fast chargers. If you haven't seen my episode on that, you should definitely check that out, where I go into a lot of detail about that. But basically, you can go from 10 to 80% in about 15 to 20 minutes at a 250 kilowatt fast charger. And yes, that's about 2 to 3 times longer than filling up your gas tank and going in and paying for it and all that kind of stuff. But when you're on a road trip, generally speaking, you want to get some food, you want to go to the bathroom, all of that kind of stuff. So it kind of comes out in the wash and you don't end up finding that you're waiting that long. And on the other hand, when you're at home, you just plug it in and it charges overnight and you don't have to worry about it and you never have to go to the gas station under normal circumstances. So no, charging does not have to take a very, very long time. Yes, it is slower than filling up a gas tank, but no, it's not that much slower. Along these lines is that a Tesla is no good for a road trip. You actually have to have a gas car and you can only drive a Tesla around the city. This is just flat out false. Our Model Y has 54,000 miles on it, and approximately half of that, like 26,000 miles of that, is all road trips that are longer than 500 miles each direction. So, I mean, some of them are up to thousands of miles each direction to Texas and other places. So we have driven this thing all over the place. We have stopped at superchargers. We've done road trips. We've slept in the back of the vehicle. It's actually very nice. It's got camp mode, so you can keep the temperature very pleasant in the car, even if it's very cold or very hot outside. So this is just wrong. You can do road trips in a Tesla. In fact, it's easier and better than doing it in a gas car because, of course, the car can drive you. And when you put in the navigation, it figures out where you need to stop, how long you need to stop, all of that kind of stuff. So Teslas are actually excellent road trip cars. And quite frankly, I wouldn't do a road trip in a gas car ever again. Next up is that you need a very expensive charger at home in order to charge your vehicle. That is also incorrect. You can get away with plugging it into a 120 volt outlet if you have enough time. It is very, very slow to charge. But when I go to my parents' house, for example, I do plug it in and overnight it'll get 30 or 40 miles. So it's actually pretty reasonable. And over time, if the car is just sitting there most of the time, it actually does charge up eventually. But generally speaking, for overnight charging, what you want to do is either have an electrician put in a 250 volt plug, costs about $300 or $400 to install that. If you have a professional electrician do it, depending on how far away it is from your breaker box and all that. Or you can do what we do, which is get a splitter. We just bought a box that splits our dryer, which is a 250 volt, 30 amp outlet. It splits it, it goes to the car, and when the car is not charging, it can go to the dryer and the dryer can dry. So easily you can charge overnight like 6 to 8 hours or something. Even if the car is totally empty at night, it'll charge up completely before the next morning, which means that just like your cell phone, you plug it in, you wake up in the morning, it's already charged, you leave the house, you go about your day, and you plug it in at night again when you get done. So yes, if you have an electrician install a separate plug for you, it will cost some money to have them do it, but of course it's not that much money. Or you could just purchase a splitter, and by the way, the Neo splitter is listed in the description of all of my videos actually, so check that out if you're interested. Next up is that if we all had EVs and we all charged them at once, the entire power grid would collapse. That is actually correct. But there is no magic wand. We're not going to suddenly have a billion EVs on the road tomorrow. That just can't happen. It's going to take a decade to 2 decades to replace all of the gas cars. So the electric grid has time to actually get stronger and more robust for this to produce more electricity and everything for these vehicles. And of course, more and more people are installing solar and batteries in their homes and everything too. So you can charge the car directly from there. And you can't do that with a gas car. Next up, let's talk about Tesla's full self-driving beta autonomous driving software, which if you don't know, is software that allows the vehicle to drive around on its own. The first argument is that FSD is vaporware and it'll never happen. And this could end up being the case, of course, because until it's absolutely solved, we don't know that it ever can be solved. But the evidence over the past several years is that Tesla is getting closer and closer and closer to solving full self-driving and having vehicles that can drive on their own completely autonomously without a human being interacting with it ever. I personally have used full self-driving beta for almost 2 years now, and the difference between October of 2021 and now is striking. I would not want to go back to October of 2021. Right now, I trust it so much that I really pretty much just monitor it and just disengage it when sometimes it's just annoyingly unassertive to me and I take it out because I want to be more assertive in my driving. But generally speaking, it's really, really good. Yes, there are still some weird things that happen, and yes, it is still beta software, but it's getting very close and it's actually really, really useful already right now, especially for road trips. Then of course we get to Dan O'Dowd's favorite hobby horse, which is that full self-driving beta is killing people, particularly cardboard children. So to answer this, let's take a look at page 77 of Tesla's 2022 impact report. This is an official document, right? And so people could go to jail if they're lying about this. Anyway, you can see from this, with full self-driving beta engaged, which is mostly non-highway miles last year, that's going to change this year and make these stats even better. They have 0.31 vehicle accidents per million miles driven. If you compare that to humans driving Teslas, that's 0.68, or it's over twice as safe as a human being driving a Tesla. And then it's about 5 times safer than the national average for people just driving cars. So assuming the Tesla is not just lying out their rear ends here and they're giving us actual statistics and everything, which I can't believe that they wouldn't be doing, you're looking at full self-driving beta being somewhere between 2 and 5 times safer than human beings driving, depending on the circumstances. Next up, of course, is the argument that you can't drive autonomously without LiDAR and radar and ultrasonic sensors. Well, Tesla is currently doing it with only cameras. Only time is going to tell whether they're going to be right or not, but they sure seem to be on the right track at this point. And at least in my experience, it drives correctly 99+% of the time using only cameras. Next up is that Tesla cheats the statistics by disengaging the autopilot 1 second before an accident's going to happen and then claiming that the person is responsible for it rather than full self-driving. Well, as it turns out, Tesla, in order to be conservative, counts any crash that happens within approximately 10 seconds of full self-driving disengagement to be related to full self-driving. So again, unless Tesla is lying about all of this, that is not in fact the case. Speaking of lying, the next one is that Tesla lies about money and statistics, about their profits and also all of their statistics. Of course, it's difficult to argue against this because I don't have access to internal data, but there are a lot of people that are going to be going to jail if they're lying about this stuff, and I'm a little bit surprised that there are not official investigations happening. I know NHTSA is doing an investigation of the full self-driving, but they're not doing a fraud investigation. There's no indication that Tesla has committed fraud at any point. So again, I can't say definitively one way or the other because I don't have access to the data, but it would surprise me greatly if Tesla is getting away with lying this egregiously. Next up is the argument that Tesla does not know how to mass manufacture vehicles. They were only good at making vehicles in small numbers and they can't make large quantities. And that Legacy Auto has this mass manufacturing capability down pat and they will destroy Tesla. Number one, let me point out my video that I just did about the comparison between mechanical watches and quartz watches and internal combustion engine vehicles and electric vehicles. I think that that would be a very good video to watch if you think that this is a reasonable argument right now. I'll also point out that recently engineers from Toyota tore apart a Tesla Model Y and they called it a work of art. They said that they'd never seen anything done this well before. And of course, Jim Farley with Ford and Herbert Diess, who was the former CEO of VW, are both huge fans and say that Tesla is a beacon of manufacturing capability to the rest of the industry. Next up is a weird one that I hadn't heard before, but one of my Patreon patrons has, which is that Teslas can't drive in the rain. Well, I will tell you, we just went through a complete deluge out there and I drove through it, no problem at all. In fact, EVs drive through the rain better than gas cars because they don't have to breathe oxygen. They don't have a combustion engine, so they don't have to take in air into the engine and combust it with gasoline in order to drive. So actually they can even go through very, very deep water without any problems whatsoever. And of course, the batteries are completely sealed off from the environment. environment, so you're not going to have shorts and things like that. That just doesn't happen. Next up is that you have to get new batteries every 10 or 20,000 miles, and that's going to cost you $15,000 or $20,000 to replace. That's simply not true. We have 54,000 miles on our Model Y. The batteries are still perfectly fine. Yes, they do degrade somewhat. They go from their 100% capacity down to like 90% or so, but then they flatten out and they stay at about 90% capacity for a long while. I know people that have driven 250,000 miles plus on their Teslas, and they're still going strong. And quite frankly, to get 250,000 miles on a gas engine, you're going to have to do a lot of maintenance, and Teslas don't require hardly any maintenance. Every 4 years, you have to go in and drain the battery fluid and refill it, but that's about it. Next up is that Teslas are more expensive than gas cars to drive. So I'll tell you, my Model Y has about a 75 kilowatt hour battery. It costs me 4.7 cents per kilowatt hour overnight to use electricity. So to fill up my tank, my battery from completely empty to completely full costs about $3.53, or about the same as 1 gallon of gas currently. And for an internal combustion engine car that gets about 30 miles per gallon efficiency at $3.50 a gallon, which is a pretty reasonable price for gasoline right now, it would cost $37.92 to fill up that tank. Or in other words, it costs about 10 times more to fill up a gas tank than it does to fill up the battery. Of course, charging at a supercharger is more expensive than charging at home, but even there, you can see from this screen grab, this is the last year of charging on my Model Y. You can see that I've spent a total of a whopping $289 on this thing to drive a lot of miles, and the savings, not the gas cost, but the savings are nearly $3,000. So I've saved almost $3,000 by not driving a gas car. And that, I have to say, is a pretty astounding statistic. Even I was surprised when I looked it up. Next up, it's too hard to learn to drive a Tesla. Yeah, it is a little bit different. Getting in and out of the car needs instructions. That's the worst part. You have to push the back, you have to get the front, things like that. They could definitely work on the doors to make those a little bit easier. As far as the driving is concerned, you push the stalk down on the right-hand side. If you're old and you used to drive a station wagon from like the 1970s, it's the same as those things that you would pull down there, but it's just a tap on the side. And then the biggest thing is actually the regenerative braking, which is that when you take your foot off the accelerator, it starts to slow down and regenerate power to the batteries. It does take a little bit of getting used to for that, but honestly, once you get used to it, when you go back to a gas car, you're like, oh man, this sucks to have to press the brakes. Because if you do it right, you really don't ever have to push the brakes. It's fantastic. So yes, it takes a day or two to get comfortable with it, but it's honestly very, very easy, and it really sucks to go back to a gas car after driving a Tesla. Next up is that Teslas catch fire all the time, and they are impossible to put out. Yes, when they do catch fire, batteries are really, really difficult to put out. So that is a legitimate complaint. But as for Teslas catching fire all the time, statistically, they catch fire 11 times less frequently than gas cars. So that's very, very small. Less than 10% of gasoline engine fires. So it's very, very small. Again, this comes from Tesla's impact report. So that would be statistics that I would trust. If a BEV does catch fire, it is a really big deal, and fire crews do have to be trained about it, but they catch fire very infrequently. And they can actually, Teslas can withstand massive collisions and stuff without puncturing the battery pack. So they actually are safer than gas cars by a lot in terms of fire risk. Next up is that Teslas are dangerous to drive. This is just flat out false. I mean, this is not even Tesla statistics. This is every single testing body that tests them globally says that they're the safest cars ever tested. Due to the very heavy batteries at the bottom, they almost can't roll over, which is one of the major causes of injury and death in vehicle collisions. They're also very, very rigid side on because, of course, they do have those battery packs. So if somebody T-bones you, it's much less likely for the car to bend inward and for you to be injured in that type of collision. And they don't have engines in the front. So if it's a head-on collision, the car can crumple very, very far before it reaches the occupant cage. So they're really, really safe, especially compared to internal combustion engine vehicles. Next up is that Teslas have no space inside because there's so many batteries. That's also not true. They actually have more space inside than pretty much all other cars in the same category as them. And a big part of this is they don't have an engine in the front, so they have storage space in the front, or a frunk. So you have an extra, like enough for like a suitcase or something, a small suitcase, to go into the front, or a bunch of groceries or whatever, plus whatever you want to put in the back of the vehicle. They have a ton of space, and we have put a ridiculous amount into our Tesla Model Y before. Next up, Teslas are worse for the environment than gas cars. It does take more carbon and more energy to build a Tesla because of the batteries, but in somewhere around 3 to 5 years, depending on the type of electricity that's generated and how you drive it and all of that kind of stuff, Tesla's cross over and become much, much greener than driving an internal combustion engine vehicle. Yes, it is something that they can do better. They could make these vehicles more efficiently with less of a carbon footprint, but over any reasonable amount of time that these cars will last, and these cars will drive 200, 300, 400,000 plus miles without needing a ton of service. So over that amount of time, you're looking at 10 to 15 years of driving. They're substantially less carbon intensive than gas cars are. Next up is that Teslas actually burn coal, and they're not greener than gas cars to drive around. So depending on where you live, yes, Teslas can burn coal. I know, for example, in Georgia, where I live, there are several coal-fired power plants that are around here. So some of my energy that I'm using to charge my vehicle is definitely coming from coal. But even with that, they're still greener than gas cars. Remember, you also have to dig up oil, then you have to refine the oil, then you have to truck the oil, then you have to put it in your car, then you have to burn it. So there's a lot of steps in terms of getting oil production up and into your car and utilizing it. You have those same steps with coal. And of course, electricity over time is going to get greener and greener with wind and solar, etc. Whereas gas is never going to be greener than it is today. You can't get the oil out of the ground any more efficiently than you can now. And the deeper you have to dig and the more difficult it is to get the oil, the more expensive energy-wise it becomes and the less green it becomes. And here's a really interesting headline from Scientific American. In a first, wind and solar generated more power than coal in the US for the first 5 months of 2023. So what that means is no matter where you lived in the United States, you were getting a lot of the power to charge up your electric vehicle, your Tesla, whatever it is, from renewable sources. And that is only going to continue to accelerate over the next 5 or 10 years. So again, charging up an electric vehicle is only going to get greener in the future, and filling up a gas vehicle is only going to get more and more dirty. Next up, Tesla builds cars in tents. Why, yes, they actually do. In Fremont, in their factory, they have these large tents. They're kind of solid roof structures. They're basically buildings without walls. They had to put them up very, very quickly during the 2018 rush to get Model 3s developed, and they've kept a lot of them here. I think they've enclosed some of them. But anyway, in the very pleasant environment of Central California, yes, they actually do have some buildings without walls. But that's not anything to take away from them. They also have Giga Texas, they have Giga Berlin, they have Giga Shanghai. They have these absolutely gigantic enclosed spaces where they are able to build massive amounts of vehicles. So yeah, they actually have and still do build some of their vehicles in tents, but it doesn't seem to slow them down at all. Next up is that Elon, through purchasing Twitter/X, has ruined the Tesla brand, and nobody wants Tesla vehicles anymore. So certainly I have to agree that Elon's escapades with Twitter and X certainly didn't help Tesla in the short term in late 2022 and early 2023. But given sales numbers, demand is clearly still there for Teslas. Could this have an effect in the next several years that maybe the brand gets tarnished or something? Yeah, that could happen. But it certainly has not had a major deleterious effect on Tesla yet. And finally, hydrogen and or solid state battery and or new technology X vehicles will kill Tesla. All of these alternative technologies are either in the experimental stage, or there's something like hydrogen where it's actually far less efficient to get hydrogen and to react hydrogen and to get energy out of hydrogen than it is just to charge up batteries. And when it comes to solid state batteries or other types of batteries, sure, in 10 years, they might actually have a big effect on the industry. But A, that's going to take 5 to 10 years to come on the market. And B, if and when it does come on the market, why can't Tesla just utilize that as well? They currently don't just manufacture their own batteries, they buy them from all sorts of suppliers around the globe. So if you have a new supplier that's like, we can supply you with gigawatts worth of solid state batteries, Tesla will just go ahead and buy them. So the argument that these other technologies are going to kill Tesla seems kind of silly. All right, so that's a lot of arguments. Some of them have some grains of truth in them. The one that has the most truth is the EPA range versus the actual range that Tesla vehicles get. They are not fantastic at that, but that's not fraud. It's the EPA. It allows you to measure your vehicles that way if you want to. So Tesla chooses to do that. They could be a little bit more transparent and like maybe under promise, over deliver a little bit more, but that's certainly not fraud. Pretty much all of the other arguments that I see here are really specious and don't hold a lot of water. What do you all think about this? Do you have other arguments that I forgot to include here? Or do you have other counter arguments against anything? Definitely let me know either way in the comments. I would love to know. And of course, if there's enough interest and enough arguments either direction, I can do a follow-up video on this. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it fun and interesting and thought-provoking. Definitely let me know what you think in the comments. While you're down there, please like the video so other people can find it. And of course, consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon, my YouTube channel members, and my Twitter/X subscribers. Thank you all so much for your support. I really do appreciate it. And of course, if you want to join any of the teams, just check out the links in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have TeslaBot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, success is a possible outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on. So check it out. And finally, thanks once again to AG1 for sponsoring today's video. Check out the link in the description, give it a try, and see how much better you feel. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.